Maine. I didn't tell him Minnesota, so I'm not telling him. My grandma believes in privacy. Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'll talk to you soon. Have a good day. Thank you. Bye. See you. Thank you. Bye.
Allow the instrument and to improve the instrument, either the pitch, bank, or power column. Starting at the top left of the T, the airspeed indicator goes into both the pitch and power columns. The attitude indicator is equally at home in the pitch and bank columns. You've probably already put the altimeter in the pitch column. Continuing clockwise, the vertical speed indicator completes the instruments. The heading indicator, turn coordinator, or turn needle and the ball, or slip skid indicator complete the lineup in the bank column. Power instruments are completed with a tachometer or the combination of the tachometer and manifold pressure gauge. Depending on the maneuver, each of these instruments will sometimes play the leading role and at other times may be in a supporting role. For a glass-equipped airplane, the flight and engine instruments are grouped into the same pitch, bank, and power columns. While the appearance may be different, the function is the same. Like your visual flying, most of your instrument time will be spent flying straight and level. The instrument pilot's definition of straight and level is maintaining constant altitude, heading, and for some phases of flight, a new addition, a constant airspeed. As the complete instrument pilot, you should be able to maintain heading, altitude, and airspeed at speeds ranging from cruise to approach. Within the normal speed range of an airplane, there are many combinations of power and pitch which will maintain altitude at different airspeeds. Recall, proper pitch and power produces predictable performance. For example, a low power setting in a nose-high pitch will maintain altitude at low airspeed. At the other end of the airplane's working speed range, a high power setting and low pitch attitude will bring about level flight at high airspeed. At a given power setting, the weight of the airplane can also affect the pitch attitude for level flight, but this can usually be disregarded in light training airplanes. While the attitude indicator gives us a direct picture of the pitch attitude of the airplane, let's look at the clues that indirect instruments can provide. These indirect instruments are the airspeed and vertical speed indicators and the altimeter. With a constant power setting, if there is no turbulence, any deviation from altitude is caused by a change in pitch attitude. Assuming constant power, the altimeter will give you an indirect indication of the pitch attitude. Any deviation from the assigned or desired altitude is a signal that you need to make a pitch change. The direction and rate at which the altimeter departs from the desired altitude is an indication of the amount of pitch change needed. For example, a large nose-up pitch change from level flight will show as a rapid clockwise movement of the altimeter needle. If the altimeter needle moves at a slower rate, the pitch change is smaller. These examples in a classic whipped airplane would appear as longer or shorter trend lines on the altimeter. Any change in indicated airspeed is also an indirect indication of a pitch change. In level flight, with power constant, the indicated airspeed should remain constant. A large change in pitch attitude will result in a rapid and large change in indicated airspeed. A small pitch change will show up as a slow and small change in indicated airspeed. The vertical speed indicator displays any up or down trend of the airplane. It indirectly shows any pitch attitude deviation from flight. Trend, or what's happening information, is displayed quickly. Rate, or how much is happening, takes several seconds to appear after the airplane has stabilized in level flight, climb, or descent. The rate delay does not occur with many class installations. Pitch corrections for level flight should be made using the attitude indicator and limited to half, full, and 1 1/2 bar widths corrections. The pitch corrections to maintain level flight are smaller than those made using the next horizon. When the airplane is properly trimmed, the control pressures needed for these small pitch changes are very light. A 1/2 bar width pitch change is used for altitude corrections of 100 feet or less. For corrections of more than 100 feet, use a full bar width pitch change initially, changing to a 1/2 bar width when the remaining altitude correction is less than 100 feet. The rate of return should not exceed double the altitude correction. If the error is 200 feet, the rate of return should not be more than 400 feet per minute. At this rate, it will take 30 seconds to return to the assigned altitude, giving you time to pay attention to heading, engine instruments, or navigation indicators. Try not to exceed a climb or descent of 500 feet per minute when returning to a desired altitude. Heading and bank controls are virtually the same thing. Heading will stay constant if the wings are kept level in coordinate flight. The wings of the miniature airplane and the horizon bar of the attitude indicator will give you an overall picture of the wing attitude, but small banks are difficult to detect. Small deviations from wing's level attitude are more easily detected using the banking scale and center index. Odds are that bank control will require more practice than pitch control. There are several reasons for this. First, the airplane is more stable in pitch and bank. And if you're a typical VFR pilot, you refer to the altimeter more than to the heading indicator. While the attitude indicator will show if the wings are being kept level, you still need to look at the heading indicator to be sure the heading is the right one and that it is kept constant. The attitude and turn indicators are supporting bank instruments during straight flight. The most common control is over-control. Just as an excessive climb or descent will cause you to overshoot altitude, an excessive rate of turn results in overshooting the target heading. For heading corrections of 5 degrees or less, keep the wings level and use rudder pressure to change the heading. 5 degrees of heading change doesn't give you enough time to make a coordinated turn. If the heading is off more than 5 degrees, make a coordinated turn, but restrict the banks to half the number of degrees you want to turn, but not more than standard rate. Intentional airspeed changes at level flight are normally accomplished by changing the power. Just the power to the setting that you previously determined will produce the desired airspeed. Adjust the pitch attitude to maintain altitude as the airspeed changes. As you approach the desired airspeed, the airspeed indicator becomes the primary power instrument, and the altimeter is primary for pitch. Fine-tune power and pitch as the airplane stabilizes at the new airspeed, and trim to relieve control pressures. Now let's take a look at climbs. To enter a constant airspeed climb, raise the nose to bring the miniature airplane to the predetermined position above the horizon bar. As the pitch attitude is raised, Increase the power to the climb setting and use right rudder to keep the airplane from turning to the left. Adjustments of the climb attitude will be dictated by the indicated airspeed. If airspeed is too high or low, the pitch attitude must be changed. Don't chase the airspeed indicator to make the change. Use the attitude indicator to make small changes of 1/2 bar weight, and note the effect on the airspeed indicator. As the desired altitude is approached, the level off must be started about 10% of the rate of climb before reaching the altitude. If the climb is 500 feet per minute, the pitch attitude should be smoothly changed to the level flight attitude 50 feet before reaching the final altitude. Use the attitude indicator to set the level attitude and grade this attitude using the altimeter. For a constant rate climb, increase the power to the approximate setting required for the desired rate of climb, and simultaneously raise the nose to the approximate pitch attitude needed for that climb rate. As the vertical speed indicator stabilizes, it becomes the primary pitch instrument, and the airspeed indicator is primary for power. As airspeed approaches cruise airspeed, let's consider a concept called overpowering for power management during a level from a climb. This technique is used to make the transition easier, quicker, and smoother. Leveling off from a climb, don't reduce power as soon as the pitch attitude is at level flight. Instead, maintain climb power until the airspeed is within 5 knots of cruise before reducing power. Now let's look at descents, which can be made at a variety of rates, airspeeds, pitch attitudes, power settings, and in various drag configurations. You and your instructor should predetermine these power settings and log them on a card for review and future reference. It's also a good idea to show the attitude indicator position expressed in bar widths alongside the power settings for the various flight modes. Later, in preparation for making instrument approaches, you'll want again to determine the power setting for rates appropriate for the airplane you are flying. To enter descent with constant airspeeds up to maximum structural cruise airspeed, simultaneously lower the pitch attitude and reduce power to the predetermined setting. When entering a descent at an airspeed less than cruise, reduce power to the predetermined setting and slow the airplane in level flight. As the airspeed approaches the descent speed, lower the nose to the predetermined attitude. Make corrections for airspeed by changing pitch attitude, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, use the attitude indicator to make small pitch changes. Correcting a rate of descent at a specific airspeed requires changing both pitch and power. If you start with a predetermined power setting and pitch attitude, any corrections needed will be small. In order to level off from a descent, you must start your level off before reaching your desired altitude. To do this, lead the level off by about 10% of the rate of descent. As an example, if you were descending at a rate of 500 feet per minute, lead the level off by about 50 feet. To level off at an airspeed higher than descent speed, lead the level off by 20 to 30% of the rate of descent. In the 500 foot per minute example, you would add power and start your level off between 100 and 150 feet before reaching your desired altitude. That completes our look at basic instrument flying in straight and level flight, as well as in climbs and descents. Later, we'll examine turns and conclude our look at the 4 fundamentals.
Of even the most sophisticated aircrafts. In the early days of aviation training, devices were used to
If there is anything that will make you aware of the value of the instrument scan that we've been talking about, it'll be flying instruments in turbulence. In smooth air, we have a condition where nothing much is disturbed until the pilot does something. In turbulence, each instrument may seem to have a life of its own. The attitude indicator is quite important in flying instruments in turbulence. If the going gets bad enough, it'll become the instrument that you look at virtually all of the time because it is the only direct indication of bank. It is of primary urgent importance that you maintain roll control of the airplane regardless of how turbulent the air becomes. Look at it this way. The airplane is stable in pitch. That is, if disturbed, it will, on its own, seek the status quo that existed before the disturbance. It's not so stable in roll. If disturbed, say a wing drops 30 degrees, and you do nothing, things are likely to get worse instead of better. Job number one in turbulence is keeping the wings level or at the desired angle of bank in a turn. You can't ignore everything else in light to moderate turbulence, so you do have to scan the other instruments, just as you do when flying in smoothing. You'll be more likely to see excursions in the other instruments when it's bumpy. Some are more important than others. For reasons that we'll explain, an altitude deviation is a primary error to catch early. When IFR, Big Brother, is watching your altitude, and a deviation from assigned altitude of 300 feet activates a signal to the controller. This flight is off altitude. Depending on the equipment in your airplane, a 300-foot deviation might show when you are somewhere between 250 and 300 feet off. The best deal in bumps is to try to keep the altitude within 100 feet. From a practical standpoint, it's more important to make a timely altitude correction than a heading correction. That's not to say that you should let your heading wander. It's only to point out that when it comes to getting close to other airplanes, the ATC doesn't, altitude may be more critical. If you are en route, gently stray 20 degrees off heading and take a half minute to catch it and correct it. Required separation with other aircraft is not likely to be compromised. If you stray 400 feet on altitude and don't catch it for 30 seconds, legal separation might be compromised. Airspeed in turbulence is best thought of as being okay within an acceptable range. Just the fact that the air is turbulent means that the airspeed will vary. If it is convective turbulence, there will be up and down drifts, and holding altitude without changing power means the airspeed will vary. If it is wind shear turbulence, the airspeed variations might be dramatic. If the turbulence is caused by wind flowing over rough terrain and you are downwind of that terrain, there will be up and down drifts. In these, maintaining altitude without changes in power will mean that the airspeed will vary. How much to let the airspeed vary before adjusting power? Well, there's no set amount. But on the average piston engine single or twin, you might start thinking of a power correction when the airspeed is 10 knots off normal cruise. And do something about it when 15 knots off. One thing is for certain, the relationship between pitch and power has to be. If, for example, the airspeed is low as altitude is low, if you have it trimmed, you will have back pressure on the elevator. Adding power and maintaining the same amount of back pressure will cause the airplane to climb. So to maintain altitude, you'll have to reduce the amount of back pressure being held on the elevator. That's power. The nature of turbulence is such that everything constantly changes. As far as bank goes, excursions that would take the bank beyond the standard rate turn must be addressed on an immediate basis. In the pitch discipline, altitude requires immediate attention if it appears it will stray by much more than feet. Airspeed is going to be let it to a point. Control altitude of the elevator and use power only when the airspeed exceeds a certain level. To do otherwise would cause the too hard. Chances are, whatever is making the airspeed fluctuate will change within a few moments. You'll have to correct it in the other direction. You'll need to make long-term power changes during certain weather conditions. This may be experienced in up or down paths on the lee side of mountains under small thunderstorms. Trim is another question. Assuming that the airplane is properly trimmed at normal cruise, it'll be out of trim anytime the airspeed is off that value. If turbulence is enthusiastic and will make a lot of pitch changes to maintain altitude, the airplane will be out of trim much of the time. To try to trim it for each variation is an exercise in creativity. The best deal is to leave it trimmed for normal cruise and smoothing, and use the pressures necessary to maintain altitude. The exception condition is expected to last for. If the air is rough enough to cause you to have difficulty maintaining altitude at 100 feet, you can request a block altitude from air traffic control. This will let you, for example, maintain a block from 5,000 to 6,000 feet. If the excursions on the water 1,000 feet are due, if substantial, you might ask for a block of 2,000 feet. That way, let the airplane ride with the ups and downs. The ultimate in turbulence flying comes in or out of storm. It's best to practice prevention through avoidance, because flying into a thunderstorm is truly trespassing on Mother Nature. There are storms that are so strong that even the best pilot in the world will have extreme difficulty maintaining control of the airplane while finding the light at the end of the tunnel. The principles that we've outlined are what might work in storms should you need a big mistake in flying to. Maintaining remote control is the primary importance.
Roscoe!
Power should be set on a value of yield maneuvering speed or slow in normal conditions, and the altitude should be allowed to vary as the airplane goes up and down with the currents within the storm. Control movements should be as gentle as possible to avoid adding to the turbulence-induced stresses. What we've covered applies to turbulence in all phases of storm flight. There are some special considerations that apply to departures and approaches. Some things that we can accept en route just don't work when coasting around and flying at speeds below cruise. It's usually turbulence with wind shear, and there is wind shear close to the ground in many of the conditions that cause trouble. Whenever you are climbing or descending and fly from smooth to turbulent air, you may well be flying into wind shear, what is also called shear zone. Here, the flying tailwind is dictated as much by the nature of the shear and increasing headwind or tailwind as it is dictated by the turbulence itself. Flying the quantity traffic climb or descent, airspeed excursions will dictate each and our action. If the airspeed starts to go low and climb at full power, you have no choice other than to reduce the nose of the pitch altitude. If the airspeed increases to the climb, you can increase the nose of the pitch altitude and enjoy a momentary increase in rate of climb. Also, pitch altitude and the forward speed. Decrease your airspeed, increase the descent rate, which will require immediate application of power, which changes. That includes to wind shear and bucket power. Tone of his voice makes it apparent that he's under some stress. The reason for that. Occasionally, when flying along IFR, you hear a pilot who sounds quite excited. The tone of his voice makes it apparent that he's under some stress. The reason for this is usually turbulence, or it might be an accumulation of ice or a mechanical problem. Whatever it may be, the pilot is honestly playing the wrong cards when he allows an event to raise his stress level to the point that he sounds on the radio like he's about to lose control of his fate. Some pilots feel lonely when IFR and bumpy clouds, and that's an understandable emotion. You are indeed all alone with the airplane and the clouds. Perhaps it is this realization that can do you the most good when the going gets rough. If you realize and acknowledge that only your skill will extricate you from an uncomfortable condition, you're off to a good start. Nobody will handle the controls for you. Nobody will manage the necessary thought processes. Where a controller might give you information or clear you to turn in one direction or another. Change altitude, the actual flying, and managing the airplane is yours alone. Not all clouds are bumpy. When the clouds are pure stratus types, it's likely fairly smooth, except in wind shear. The nature of weather is such, though when instrument meteorological conditions exist, there may be some bumps. So it stands to reason that we should get as much training and practice in turbulence as possible. The best way to do this is fly simulated instruments with a safety pilot on windy days. Not enough wind to make ground handling a problem, but enough to make the air turbulent. If you happen to be training in the summer, fly at low altitude in the turbulence. Another thing in training is fly through some little cumulus clouds on an IFR flight plan with your instructor. Avoid the big ones for sure, but stick your nose in those little puffies that top out under 10,000 feet. By doing this, you can see the nature of turbulence, cumulus clouds, and gain a greater respect for the churning that goes on in those clouds. The best pilot in turbulence is the pilot who's not surprised by it and who's had experience flying in it. Next time you're out flying in those bumps, try for a moment just holding the control wheel stock still. Watch what the airplane does. Then start making control movements only as necessary to maintain straight and level flight. Make them as gently as possible. Chances are you'll find yourself sweating less. Having a plan for any and every eventuality is a great aid to keeping cool in the cockpit. Likely, the pilot who sounds frantic is the pilot who is sitting in the left front seat of the airplane, dumbfounded, wondering what comes next.
Turns made while flying by reference to instruments range from shallow compass turns to 45-degree banks deep turns. The usual instrument turn for propeller airplanes is the standard rate turn, which changes the airplane heading at a rate of 3 degrees per second. Variations are usually referred to as fractions or multiples of standard rate, such as half or double standard rate. Faster airplanes turn at half standard rate.
However, to maintain a standard rate turn as airspeed increases, your bank angle will also need to increase. At a true airspeed of 100 knots, the bank angle is 15.38 degrees, and at 300 knots true airspeed, the angle required is 39.5 degrees. When flying full panel, the attitude indicator is used to establish the approximate bank angle. You can estimate within several degrees of the angle by dividing the true airspeed in knots by 10 and then adding 7 to the result. At 100 knots, the actual bank needed is 15.38 degrees, and at 300 knots, the angle is 39.5 degrees, while the estimate yields 17 and 37 degrees, respectively. After establishing the approximate bank using the attitude indicator, the turn indicator is used to fine-tune the standard rate turn. If you fly with a turn coordinator, it's simply a matter of aligning the wing of the miniature airplane with the left or right index. A standard rate turn is shown on many glass-equipped airplanes when the heading indicator trend line is matched to a specific index line. In most instrument flying, the bank angle used is the lesser of that for a standard rate, or 30 degrees. If you are fortunate enough to have a flight director, the maximum bank inward command is usually 25 degrees. As you roll into a level turn, use the attitude indicator to set up the estimated angle of bank. As a measure of a smooth roll, the airplane should turn between 1/3 to 1/2 the degrees of bank used. Rolling into a 20-degree bank should take between 7 to 10 degrees of turn. At trailing airplane speeds, the relatively shallow bank requires very little elevator back pressure to maintain altitude. After establishing the bank, use the turn indicator to make any adjustment for standard rate. Check the attitude indicator, altimeter, and vertical speed indicator to confirm level flight. If a pitch adjustment is necessary, use the attitude indicator to make a small pitch change. At standard rate, the added drag will cause the airspeed to decrease by 2 or 3%. In most circumstances, it's easier to accept this negligible decrease and not adjust power for the short time spent making the turn. If constant airspeed is desired, throttle must be increased, and the airspeed indicator used to determine the correct power setting. For a smooth rollout, lead the target heading by the same amount of turn it took to roll into the turn. Use the attitude indicator to level the brakes and the heading indicator to be sure the turn is stopped. As the bank decreases, relax whatever back pressure was used in the turn and scan the attitude indicator, altimeter, and vertical speed indicator.
Another variation is timed turns, which are based on turning at standard rate for a predetermined time. In effect, the clock is used to replace the heading indicator. The accuracy of timed turns depends on turning at standard rate, making it important to check the calibration of the turn indicator in advance. To check the turn indicator, establish a standard rate turn and start timing when the heading indicator shows the airplane on a cardinal heading, such as north. At the end of 1 minute at standard rate, check the heading of the airplane. The airplane should have turned 180 degrees during the 1 minute standard rate turn. If the airplane did not turn 180 degrees, you'll have to use an indication other than standard rate. If the airplane turned 200 degrees, you'll have to use an instrument indication slightly less than standard rate. In theory, the error should be the same for both right and left turns. To make sure, check the turn indicator in the opposite direction. At best, this is not very precise, but at least it'll get you closer to standard rate.
For a timed turn, divide the degrees of turn by 3. Press start on a timer as you begin the turn. Continue the turn until time is up. For 60 degrees of turn, start the rollout after 20 seconds. The airplane will turn during the rollout, but this is offset by the less than standard rate during the roll-in. Timed turns in a glass-equipped airplane may need to be performed with an estimated bank angle if the heading indicator has failed and displays a red X. A data problem that removes the heading indicator will also hide the heading trend indicator. This indicator relies on a calculation of the heading change to provide its output. While a bank angle estimated timed turn is not as precise, it will provide sufficient guidance during the heading change to get close. Minor adjustments can then be made with the compass. 45-degree bank steep turns are not normally used in instrument flying. They are proficiency maneuvers, which will enable you to react confidently and quickly to unusual flight attitudes. Steep turns call for a rapid scan, correct instrument interpretation, and positive control of the airplane. Significant changes in aircraft control occur at steep bank attitudes. With a 45-degree bank, the rate of turn is very high. At 120 knots, a 360-degree turn takes 39.5 seconds. At 150 knots, 49.5 seconds. The loss of vertical lift requires prompt, positive elevator control to prevent rapid movement of the airspeed, altimeter, and vertical speed needles. Steep turns are entered the same as shallower turns, but you need to scan rapidly as the bank steepens. Your scan must be fast enough to note the need for pitch changes. Steady, smooth elevator back pressure will maintain altitude. As bank and drag increase, power required to maintain constant altitude at cruise airspeed increases. You should determine the power setting necessary in order to make power adjustments without a lot of attention to power or airspeed instruments. Attend to first things first. Keeping pitch relatively constant will give you more time to check for airspeed and bank control. While errors in performing steep turns are the same as errors in shallower bank turns, they are more exaggerated and difficult to correct. If you bank without adjusting pitch as bank increases, the pitch corrections will require increasing elevator back pressure. In an extreme overbanking condition, the increase in wing loading and the loss of lift finally reaches the point where elevator back pressure only tightens the turn. A rapid loss of altitude and increase in airspeed indicate an overbanked and nose-low attitude. Don't attempt to correct with elevator back pressure. Instead, shallow the bank while checking the attitude indicator and altimeter. If the airspeed increase is rapid and approaching the caution range, reduce power.
You may be quite familiar with tablets and aviation apps from your private pilot training, but you'll find them even more valuable for
instrument flying. These devices can help you plan cross-country flights, provide pre-flight weather briefings, display electronic approach charts, show GPS moving maps, and much, much more. Even with these advances in mobile computing technology, there's a good chance your flight instructor will still teach you how to use paper charts, leaving your tablet on the sidelines, at least for a few lessons. Despite what you may think, he's not trying to punish you. The knowledge you gain by learning the old school method will allow you to appreciate the speed and simplicity that tablets provide. But more importantly, it will help you understand the fundamental concepts and calculations used in instrument flying. You also may be asked to demonstrate proficiency with paper charts on your check ride. Before throwing your paper charts out the window and relying on a tablet, there are a few items you should become familiar with. The first is a basic understanding of the legalities that relate to flying with electronic flight bags, or EFBs, the term the FAA uses to describe tablets in the cockpit. FAR 9121 requires that you verify your EFB, or any electronic device for that matter, will not cause interference with the navigation or communications systems installed on the aircraft. You'll also want to become familiar with Advisory Circular 91-78, which provides guidance to pilots using EFBs to replace paper charts in the cockpit. This AC says that it's okay to substitute electronic charts for paper in flight, but you must adhere to the following guidelines. First, you'll need an application that displays the charts on the tablet, and the charts and data must be kept current. New data and chart updates are available for download every 28 days, right in your aviation application. Next, AC 91-78 recommends bringing along a backup source, such as a paper chart or second EFB. This is not mandatory. Finally, the guidance suggests using the tablet first during an evaluation period with paper charts still accessible before relying solely on the electronic device for your charts in flight. Beyond the legalities, another important consideration is how to secure the tablet in a way that allows for easy operation during all phases of flight and to make sure it doesn't fall out of reach when flying through rough air. The first option is a knee board, which keeps it locked down on your leg and within reach. An alternative is to mount it in the cockpit using a dedicated mounting bracket made specifically for aviation, either to the yoke or a side window. As you become more familiar with the device's capability, you'll learn how a tablet can do much more than just automate flight planning and replace paper charts. When combined with certain wireless accessories, it could even display in-flight METARs and weather radar, show nearby traffic, and even provide backup flight instruments. After gaining some experience, you'll find that using a tablet in the cockpit can increase the safety and efficiency of your flights. But as valuable as it is, remember 3 key points before you blast off on your next paperless flight. First, get to know your preferred EFB app like the back of your hand. If you're depending on a tablet as a primary reference for charts, plus such situational awareness, weather, and so much more, you need to be proficient with it, especially when flying single-pilot IFR. There simply isn't time to look down and poke around looking for the right screen. Treat your EFB app as part of the airplane's avionics system. Train on it and stay current. Second, make sure to keep chart databases up to date. A tablet is only a legal replacement for charts as long as the information is current, so get in the habit of updating the databases every month. Most apps make this very easy to do, so there's no excuse for flying with expired charts. Finally, resist the urge to focus too much on your tablet, no matter how impressive its capabilities are. An electronic flight bag is a powerful tool, but it's just that, a tool. Remember that you are still the pilot in command.
Except for the altimeter and static pressure system check, pilots are not responsible for any rules concerning the accuracy of the flight instruments. However, there are some good operating practices we should follow.
When the altimeter is set to the current altimeter setting, note the variation between airport elevation and the indicated altitude. If the variation is plus or minus 75 feet or more, the altimeter should be checked. Before rushing the altimeter to the instrument shop, take a look at the airport sketch or diagram to check the elevation where the airplane is located. Airport elevation listed on charts is defined as the highest point on an airport's usable runways. At Denver International, the airport elevation, 5,431 feet MSL, is the height above sea level at the approach end of 35 left. At the approach threshold of runway 26, the elevation is 5,291 feet. A perfect altimeter set to the correct setting would show an apparent error of 140 feet, well above the limit. If the airplane is located at the end of runway 17 left and the altimeter indicates 5,325 feet, it also shows true altitude. True altitude is the actual height above sea level. After takeoff, non-standard temperature causes a small difference between indicated and true altitude. If standard conditions were to exist, most of the altitudes pilots are interested in would all be the same value. Under standard conditions of temperature, pressure, and density, indicated density and pressure altitudes would all be the same. That leaves only absolute altitude, which is the actual height above the surface.
When preparing for written or oral versions of tests for certificates and ratings, a lot of pilots have problems understanding the effects of incorrect altimeter settings. Let's look at some of the concepts to help them deal with altimeter problems.
An altimeter is a barometer. It interprets lower pressure as an increase in altitude and higher pressure as a decrease in altitude. The altimeter setting establishes a baseline for the altimeter. An altimeter set at 30 inches of mercury should indicate an altitude of 0 when it's at a height where the ambient pressure is 30 inches. This 0 altitude is the baseline. When the altimeter setting is changed to a lower value, the altimeter will indicate a lower altitude, and when it's set to a higher pressure, the indicated altitude will be higher. A lower setting decreases the difference between the baseline pressure and the pressure sensed by the altimeter, resulting in the lower altitude indication. When the altimeter setting is raised, the difference between baseline and sensed pressure is increased, and the altimeter shows a higher altitude. If the altimeter setting is 30.57 inches and the altimeter is set at 29.92, it will indicate 650 feet lower than the actual altitude. Remember, 1 inch of mercury is roughly equal to 1,000 feet. Setting the altimeter up to 30.57, move the hands up 650 feet, and the altimeter will then indicate the correct altitude.
Temperature also has an effect on indicated altitude. Temperature higher than standard will cause the altimeter to indicate a lower altitude than actual. In temperatures lower than standard, the altimeter will indicate an altitude higher than actual.
Don't try to reason the temperature effect by only comparing the density of warm air to that of cold air. The trick is to remember that if a column of warm air and a column of cold air have the same pressure at the base, a column of lighter warm air has to be higher. A given pressure level is higher in the warmer than standard column and lower in the colder than standard column of air. A memory aid to remember is when flying from high to low pressure or temperature, look out below. The airplane will be lower than the altimeter indicates. The pressure error is eliminated by maintaining the correct altimeter setting. However, there is no correction made for non-standard temperature since the deviation is small. Non-standard temperature has the same effect on all aircraft in the area. Vertical separation is maintained even though true altitude may be different than indicated. The IFR minimum altitudes ensure obstacle clearance in non-standard temperatures. The altimeter, vertical speed, and airspeed indicators are usually called the pitot-static instruments. The airspeed indicator is the only instrument which depends on both pitot and static pressure, while the altimeter and vertical speed indicator only use static pressure.
If the static source becomes blocked, the airplane climbs or descends, the altimeter will continue on all aircraft in the area.
vertical separation is maintained even though true altitude may be different than indicated. The IFR minimum altitudes ensure obstacle clearance in non-standard temperatures. The altimeter, vertical speed, and airspeed indicators are called the pitot-static instruments. The airspeed indicator is the only instrument which depends on both pitot and static pressure, while the altimeter and vertical speed indicator only use static pressure.
If the static source becomes blocked, the airplane climbs or descends, the altimeter will continue to indicate the altitude where the blockage happened. The vertical speed indicator will stay at 0.
The airspeed indicator measures the difference between static and pitot ram pressure. At the altitude where the static was blocked, the airspeed indicator will be correct. At a higher altitude, the airspeed indicator will indicate an airspeed lower than correct. This is because the static side has the lower altitude static pressure, and the ramp side has the weaker pressure of the higher altitude. Below the altitude where the static system is blocked, relatively lower air on the pitot side overpowers the weaker air on the static side, resulting in higher than correct airspeed indications. The cure for the blocked static is to use the alternate static source, either an installed system or an emergency system, which is activated by breaking the glass on the vertical speed indicator. In an unpressurized airplane, the alternate static source is using the alternate static source most, but not all, the problems. Alternate static vented to the cabin will usually cause the airspeed and altimeter indications to be higher than actual. The vertical speed indicator will show a momentary uptrend and then return to its original position. Instrument indications read higher than actual because of the slightly lower atmospheric pressure in the cabin. Back to basic aerodynamics and Bernoulli flow. When a fluid flows over a curved surface, there is a velocity increase and a corresponding pressure decrease. The fuselage is a large curved surface, and in flight there is a pressure decrease at the outer skin. Pressure from inside the cabin tends to equalize with the outer skin pressure. The amount of altimeter and airspeed indicator error varies with make and model of airplane, as well as heater and fresh air vent configuration. Newer airplanes have an airspeed and altimeter correction table in the pilot's operating handbook. Pitot blockage only affects the airspeed indicator. When the pitot freezes or blocked, ram air opening becomes blocked. The indicated airspeed will drop to near 0, and pitot openings are blocked. Pitot or ram pressure is trapped in the system, and the airspeed indicator acts like an altimeter. When climbing, the airspeed indicator will increase. The trapped ram pressure is acting against static pressure, which decreases with altitude. When descending, static pressure increases, and the airspeed indication will be decreasing. In level flight, large power changes will not change airspeed indications, even though actual airspeed changes. Before takeoff, check the vertical speed indicator. It should read 0. If not, gentle taps may return it to the 0 position. Most vertical speed indicators can be adjusted by turning the screw in the lower left corner of the instrument case. If it is not adjustable, use the ground indication as the level flight position. The gyroscopic instruments are powered by either electricity or pneumatic pressure. The electric turn indicator should be checked by turning it on before engine start and listening for unusual noises as the gyro starts spinning. After engine start, engine noise masks any unusual sound coming from the turn indicator. The air-driven gyros for the attitude and heading indicators may take up to 5 minutes to reach operating speed. Set the heading indicator to the compass heading before taxiing. Even though the gyro is not up to full speed, the heading indicator should stay reasonably close to the compass. In flight, precession of not more than 3 degrees at 15 minutes is considered normal. While taxiing, the turn indicator should indicate the direction of turn, and the ball should move freely opposite the turn. The attitude indicator horizon bar should erect and remain stable in level position within 5 minutes of engine start. If the horizon bar is not level during straight taxi, or tilts more than 5 degrees while making taxi turns, the attitude indicator is not reliable. Worth every moment you spend. Partial panel instrument flight can be described as controlling the airplane by reference to a limited number of flight instruments. These instruments often consist of the airspeed and turn and slip indicators, as well as the clock and magnetic compass. Instrument failure could be caused by either vacuum, electrical, or pitot-static source failure. Vacuum failure often causes the attitude and heading indicators to become inoperative. If your airplane is equipped with digital instruments, an electrical failure may cause you to rely on the standby analog instruments, airspeed indicator, attitude indicator, and altimeter. Instrument failures in glass-equipped airplanes may also be partial failures due to the malfunction of a single component within the system. This failure could be a box sending information to a display or a display itself. For primary flight display failures, many glass-equipped airplanes are capable of displaying the full instrument panel on an alternate display. With this type of failure, you may have all of your instruments, but you will be scanning a different area of the panel. Partial failures in either analog or digital instruments could also be caused by a faulty pitot-static system, such as a blocked pitot tube or static source. The gyroscopes for analog attitude and heading indicators can be powered by a vacuum or pressure pump mounted on the engine accessory case or electrically. The gyroscope for an analog turn indicator is usually electrically powered, giving you wing level ability in case of a pump failure. The attitude indicator is usually the first instrument to slowly show a pump failure, usually by incorrect pitch indications. An additional problem is that it usually ends up showing a nose-low banked attitude. To get some notion of how vacuum-driven instruments react to a power failure, sit in the airplane for a few minutes after engine shutdown to observe the indications as the gyros spool down. This is disconcerting and distracting when you are actually flying, trying to control the airplane. Your task will be a lot easier if you cover up the inoperative instruments. The fact that electrical or pump failure makes the gyroscopic instruments vulnerable to failure stresses the need to include the other instruments in the scan. Any discrepancy between the gyro instruments and the other instruments must be viewed with suspicion. The best evidence of a pump failure is when the other instruments do not confirm what is shown by the heading or attitude indicators. Some general aviation airplanes also have a standby attitude indicator using a power source separate from the primary analog attitude indicator. An electric attitude indicator placed elsewhere in the panel makes an excellent backup to an air-powered unit. It can be useful for confirming a failure along with returning the airplane safely to the ground. If your airplane is so equipped, practice on the backup device is important. When a failure happens in instrument conditions, ask ATC for help. The most desirable response from ATC is clearance and vectors to VFR conditions. If this is not possible, ask ATC to avoid altitude changes, delays, and course changes. As part of your emergency operations outlined in the Airman Certification Standards, you'll demonstrate to the examiner a non-precision approach with the loss of your primary flight instrument indicators. Or to put it another way, you'll fly the approach on partial panel. In addition to the incentive of passing the practical portion of the instrument rating test, there is the real possibility that you may have to control the airplane after an actual failure. Let's take a look at flying an analog instrument airplane without the attitude and heading indicators. Without an attitude indicator, you have to rely on indirect instruments for attitude control. Using the altimeter to determine pitch requires interpretation of both the direction of needle movement and the rate at which the needle moves. A gain in altitude means the pitch attitude is above the flight level attitude. A rapid pitch attitude is large. A slow rate of altimeter needle movement indicates a small deviation from level flight. Avoid a large pitch change. Be content to slow down the rate of movement. If the altimeter needle slows abruptly, ease off some of the control pressure to keep the needle moving slowly. When the needle moves slowly, you are close to level flight. At that point, add some more control pressure to stop the direction of needle movement. If the needle stops moving, you are in level flight. If the needle reverses its movement, you have passed through level flight. Continue your scan and carefully relax control pressures. At constant power, the airspeed indicator will also give you an indirect indication of pitch. Again, you need to interpret both direction and rate of needle movement. Rapid movement means a large pitch deviation. Slow movement, a small deviation. As you respond with control pressure, the rate of airspeed needle movement slows and the airplane approaches level flight. When the airspeed needle stops, the airplane is approximately in the level flight attitude. The airspeed indicator is often accused of lagging. The indicator itself does not have any appreciable lag, but the airplane takes time to accelerate or decelerate in response to a pitch attitude change. The vertical speed indicator is both a trend and a rate instrument. Like the altimeter and airspeed indicator, it presents an indirect indication of pitch attitude. As a trend instrument, it quickly shows vertical movement of the airplane. With constant power, disregarding turbulence, this vertical movement is the result of a pitch change. As a rate instrument, an analog vertical speed indicator lags somewhat behind the actual rate of vertical movement. The amount of lag is directly proportional to both the speed and amount of pitch change. Abrupt, large pitch changes cause erratic needle movements and a greater lag before the needle stabilizes. Small, smooth pitch changes make the needle move with minimum lag has become balanced in level, climbing, or descending flight. In level flight, the vertical speed indicator will quickly show deviations from level attitude. Use light control pressures to correct any up or down indications. To avoid over-controlling, the rate of return to the desired or assigned altitude should not be more than 500 feet per minute, or double the altitude correction. Most airplanes are fairly stable in pitch. Be patient and don't hurry. Over-controlling has the net effect of too high a rate of return, which results in passing through the desired or assigned altitude. Without the attitude indicator for quick, direct reference for pitch attitude, trim becomes even more important. It's not desirable to maintain consistent elevator control pressure for any length of time. Now let's look at partial panel heading control in this situation. This is difficult for several reasons. First, because the airplane tends to be less stable in bank than in pitch. Second, the magnetic compass, which is usually the only heading instrument left, can only be relied on when the airplane is in straight, level, unaccelerated flight. From your private pilot certificate training, you'll recall that lag and lead and acceleration errors are caused by magnetic dip. During a level turn, the compass can only be believed on headings of east and west. And when accelerating or decelerating, the compass is only truthful on north and south headings. During turns, anytime the airplane is on a northerly heading, the compass will lag or be behind the airplane.
From both.
On southerly headings, it will lead or run ahead of the airplane. On any headings other than north or south, acceleration will cause the compass to indicate north of the real head, and during deceleration, indicate south of the real heading. Furthermore, the pedestal mounting of the compass card allows the case to tilt only 18 or so degrees before the card is locked up against the case. Lead, which is greatest on south headings, and lag, which is maximum on north headings, vary with the latitude where the turn is made. An average for the lower 48 states is about 30 degrees maximum, which decreases uniformly as the airplane approaches east and west headings. In a left turn, the airplane is pointing north when the compass indicates 030 degrees. In a right turn, it's pointing north when the compass indicates 330 degrees. Turning to north in a 15-degree bank left turn, the rollout should start when the compass indicates 037 or 038 degrees. In a right turn to south, the rollout should start when the compass indicates 202.